Hello guys, let's talk about HTML form elements. So in this video, I'm going to give you some more details about HTML form elements. So we are going to talk about input elements, label, text area, and some other elements as well. All right. So the HTML form element can contain one or more elements. Okay, so the form element here, if you want to create it, inside you can write inputs, all the various elements that can contain in your form. So one of the most used form element is going to be the input element. So the input element can be used to display several types of input controls. Okay, so depending on the type attribute. So the element is input like this. For example, if you want to write, you want to create a text field. So depending on the type, you say type here text. So this is going to determine a text field. Let me just add the ID. I will say name and then the name. So the name here is necessary because if you do not write the name of your input, it will not be sent to the file server. Okay, so text here will say that this particular input is going to be a text input. So you can also create an email input. This is to make sure that this is going to be an email input. Okay, or you can say password. If you say password as the type of your input, this is going to create a password input. You can say button, for example, this is going to create a radio button. So there are some other types of input that you can create. So this is one of the first and one of the most used form element that we can talk about. So all the different values of the type attribute, I'm going to make a video where I'm going to cover these input types, so that we can have an exhaustive list. But in this video, I'm going to talk to you about form elements, okay? Elements that you can put inside your form. So this was about the input element. Another element that we can talk about is going to be the label element. Okay, so let me just come here and say label like this. And I'll say name. I'll close the tag, label like this. So the label element here is going to be used to define a label for several form elements. For example, this is going to be the label for this particular radio button. So if you put it here, now you can see that the name will appear here. You can put it down here like this. And this is a lot more better. So the label element is useful for screen reader users because the screen reader will read out loud the label when the user focuses on the input element. And the label element will also help users who have difficulty clicking on very small regions, such as the radio button here. Okay, and so because the user may click on the text within the label element, it will toggle the radio button and all of that. In the label element, we can write an attribute. This is going to be the for attribute. And the particularity, the usefulness of this for attribute is that it needs to have the same name as the ID of the input element here in order to link the input and the label. Okay, so here if I say name, so this is going to make sure that this radio button is linked to this name element. So it needs to have the same value. Okay, the ID in the input and the for attribute here needs to have the same value. So that's it. The next element that we can talk about is going to be the select element. So let me write that. I'll say select like this, and I will close that here. And but before that, I can add a label. So for this particular label, I will say for CT. Okay, say CT like this. Okay, there's a typo here. Let me correct it. I will say CT and I will say name. That would be CT as well. And in the select element, the select element is actually an HTML element that you can use to define a drop-down list. Okay, as you can see here, I have a drop-down list here. So let me put a break line. So I'll say break line like this. Okay. So when you put your break line here, so, and as I was saying, if you want to create a drop-down list, you need to use the select element, and inside the select element you are going to write the various options of your list, and you need the value attribute. In that value attribute you're going to write the value of your option, and here you will write the name that needs to appear on the screen, and I'll say option closing tag. All right, so I will add a few more options like this, and if I say London, here I will say Michigan, and I will write it like this. So when you come to your drop down list, there you can see the various options in your drop down list. So this is how you create a select element, or you create a drop down list using the select element. So the option element here is used to define an option that can be selected. So like, for example, if you select London, now you see the selected option. And by default, the first item in the drop-down list is selected. As you could see, Paris here was by default the option that was selected. And in order to define a pre-selected option, you can add a selected attribute to your option. For example, here, if you want Michigan to be a pre-selected option, you can add an attribute here by saying selected. So when you say that, now you can see that Michigan will appear as the pre-selected option of your drop-down list. Okay, you can also use the size attribute to specify the number of visible values. Like if I come to my select option here, and I can add the ID. So I need the ID here to link that select element with the label here. Okay, so the ID needs to have the same value. I'll say city, and I can add a name as well. Name will be city as well, and then I can add the attribute size and assign it the value 2. So as I said, the size attribute here is going to be used to specify the number of visible values. So now you can see the visible values of my drop-down list are now 2. Okay, if I say 3, so you will see the 3 values showing on the screen, and you can select your values like this. So this is how you can use the size attribute with your select element. You can also allow for multiple selections, like you want to use the multiple attribute to allow the user to select more than one value from your drop down list. Let me just add another option here, and I will say Lagos like this. This is another city, and here I'll write it like this. So now in your I can remove the selected here. So if you want your user to select more than one value, you can use the multiple attribute. So you come to your select element here and say multiple. Okay, so when you say multiple like this, and let me remove this, for example, now when you come to your let me say when you click here, you are not able to select multiple. I don't know why. Okay, yeah. So you need to use the keyboard control in order to select multiple items. Let me just increase the size here. If I say 4, so now when you press control, you can select multiple. But you will see that if I remove multiple here, and then select control, and when I click here, I am not able to select multiple values from my drop down. Okay, so the multiple attribute allows you to select multiple values from your list, from your drop down list. So that's what we can talk about the select element. Now the next element that we can actually talk about would be the text area element. So the text area element is going to allow you to create a text area. So the text area is going to be a multi-line input field. Okay. For example, on your form, you would need the user to write a message, a comment, that will be made up of multiple lines. So you would need a text area element for that. So in order to create a text area element, you will definitely need the text area to be written like this, text area, and you say text area. All right. So now when you say like this, you can see that your text area is showing here. Let me break line so that it will show down here. Let me add another break line. All right. So as usual, you can use the attribute name to name your text area. You can say comment, for example. One other thing that you can use with the text area is that you can determine the size of your text area by using the rows attribute. So like if you say rows here and say 10, for example, this is going to determine the height, or the number of rows of your text area. Let us say that it would be 8 like this. You can also use calls attribute here. This is going to determine the number of columns. When you write like this, now you can see how the number of columns has been reduced. And you can also set the default text for your text area. So you write something here, like write your comment, please. Okay, so by default, this text is going to show in your text area. Let me just reduce this like this. Yes. So as I was saying, the rows attribute specifies the visible number of lines in your text area. The calls attribute is going to specify the visible width of your text area. And if you write the text here, it's going to be the default text in your text area. But you can still remove that and write whatever you want in the text area. Okay, you can also define the size of your text area using CSS. You can say width, height, and all of that. So instead of using the calls and rows here, we can simply say style. And in here, we'll say width, like 200 pixels, for example. Column. And then height, maybe 500 pixels. Now you can see that the size has increased. If you say 100 pixels, yeah, you have your size. You can reduce that, say in 80 pixels, and like this. So this is actually how you can use the text area. Another form element that we can talk about would be the button element, how to create a button. So in order to create the button, you can use the button element. So you say button. So the button here is going to be a clickable button, different from the submit button. You create the submit button, you can create the submit button using the input, and in the type attribute you write submit. So the browser would definitely know that you want to create a submit button. But here we are creating a normal button that is going to be clickable in the form. Like here you can say button. For example, if you say click here, like that, now you can see you have a clickable button. Okay, and in your button you can say type. It's still the type button. Okay, so this is a common attribute that you can use, and I will break line here so that the button will come down here. Okay, so now here I have my button. Okay, so you always need to specify the type here, the type attribute, because depending on your browser, you may have different default types of button element and all of that. All right. Now, the next element that we can talk about would be the field set and the legend elements. So the field set, let me create the field set here, is actually an element that is used to group related data in a form. For example, when you create a sign-up form, you want to group them. In order to group them, you need a field set element, and inside the field set, you are going to enclose your elements inside a legend. You're gonna need a legend, which will be like a caption. All right, so let's come up here. Let's say, for example, that this is a form, and we will have our text here, our text field here, and we want the name, the label to come up here. Let's bring this up. Okay, we'll bring this up as well. So we'll come down here and say field set, close that. Now, when you say field set like this, you see what has happened to our web page. So we have like a frame that is going to show on the screen. Let me put all these values inside. So inside my field set, I'll put it there. So now you can see that these values are being enclosed inside a frame. Yes, so that's it. And we can use the legend element in order to define a caption for the particular field set. So like, for example, here we will say legend. User data form. So this is just an example, and I'm going to close the legend tag. If I close it like this, so now you can see the legend that has been given to our field set. Yeah, so this is basically how you can use the field set element. Let's talk about the next element, which will be the data list element. So the data list element is going to specify a list of predefined options for an input element. So users will see a drop-down list of the predefined options in their input data. Okay, and the list attribute of the input element will refer to the ID attribute of the data list. So this is what we are going to see. So let's come here and say input. Okay, and down here we'll say data list. And now I'm going to close the data list like this. Inside the data list, I will need an option element. Yes. So I need some attributes. Okay. So the first attribute that I would need would be the list attribute. I'm going to assign a name to the list attribute, but that name needs to be the same as the one assigned to the ID attribute in my data list. So for example, here in the input, I would say country or countries. Okay. So in the list, attribute of my input, I would also say countries. And in the options, I need the value to be the names of the countries that I want to display. So I'll say France, and sorry, so let me come down here. So I'm going to say option here, England. Let me copy this, paste it. Now say Ghana and Japan, for example. Let me just break line here. So now you can see that when I come to my input and I click on it, I have a pre-selected list of elements. So I have a predefined options for my input element, which is different from this input here. When I click on this input here, I don't have a predefined option. Okay, I need to write, the text inside by myself. But by using data list, I am going to have a predefined option for my input element. So that's the use of the data list element. Let's talk about the output element, which is the next form element that we need to have a look at. So the output element is going to be used to represent, for example, the result of a calculation. Okay. So for that, we are going to write something in here. So what I'm going to write, I will still need an input element. So I'll say input. The type of this particular input would be range. Okay. It will need an ID equal, if for example, I will need a name attribute. Make it simple, I'll say A. And I will say value, maybe 50. So that's the first input. Okay. Let me break line here. Add another break line. I'm going to write 0 here, 100 plus. And then down here, I'm going to copy and paste this. So as for this other input, the type will be number, the ID would be B, the name would be B, and paste. Down here, I'll say equal. And then I will use the output element. So I'll say output name x, and I'll say for equal a space b. And I'm going to close my output. So this is how, this is showing here. What I want to show you is that I want to show an output of, this output element. So in order to do that, as I was telling you, the output element here is used to, represent the result of a calculation, for example. So we are going to use some JavaScript here. So I will say on input, and in here, I will say the value of my output element here, because I named my output element x. So x, that value here, means that I want the value of my output element to be equal to the value, the integer value of the input a, like this, plus the value of the integer of b. So b, that value. So remember that a is the input, this input here, which is the range, this particular range, and b is this input here, which is a number. And by default, it's 50 here. So when you do that, you will see that if I put my cursor like this, there you can see the value. If I increase this, it is also going to increase the value of the output here. Okay, so that's basically what I wanted to show you. For example, if you have a calculation and you want to display it on your web page, you can use the output here. So here we are just creating a range. This is to say that we have a range element from 0 to 100. Okay, we have represented that, and here we have an input field that is going to take numbers, and we have set the default number to be 50 here, but it can go down as well. And here is the equal sign, and then we are using the output element here to say that, okay, this is the name of the output, and this is the for attribute that is going to make sure that this particular output is linked to this input and this input as well. So that's the reason why when we write x value here. So this line of code simply means that we want the value of our output to be equal to the value of this input plus the integer value of the second input, basically. So that's the operation, that the calculation that it's making here. So when I increase using my range here, you can see that the value is also increasing. If I increase in the field here, in the input field, the value will also increase. So that's how you can work with that. So guys, that's it for this video. The HTML form elements that you need to know, and we covered a lot of them in this video. So I hope it was informative enough. If you still have any question, feel free to ask in the comment section. And okay, if you like the video, feel free to like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Let's meet in the next video.